Namaskar and welcome to Sansad Television. I am Vishal Dahiya and you're watching our daily show Perspective, where we bring you detailed analysis of key national and international issues. Today we're going to talk about the Belarus migrant crisis. In fact, the situation at Europe's eastern border with Belarus has been in focus for quite some time now. Thousands of migrants, mostly from the Middle East, have flocked to Belarus to try to enter Europe through neighboring EU member states such as Poland, Latvia, or Lithuania. Now, the European Commission has accused Belarus of luring migrants to Minsk with the false promise of easy entry to European Union. Now, the Belarus, which denies fomenting the crisis, cleared a migrant camp near the border last week and also started to repatriate some people to Iraq. Polish Prime Minister, who visited Estonia, Lithuania and Latvia to discuss the situation, has said that the migrant crisis is far from over. Both Poland and Lithuania have said that they have found evidence on migrants they intercepted, which shows how Belarusian authorities helped them to arrange their journeys to the border. What are the reasons behind this migrant crisis and how can it be diffused? We will discuss and analyze all these aspects in today's episode of Perspective. And for more on this, we're joined by two distinguished experts. Let me first introduce them to you, beginning with Mr. Elvin Didar Singh is joining us. He is author and former civil servant. He is someone who's done a lot of work on the phenomena of migration there as well. Professor Gulshan Sachdeva is also joining us from the Center for European Studies at Jawaharlal University. Let me begin with you, Professor Sachdeva. Before we go into the further details, let's first try and understand what's happening there, on the border of Belarus and Poland. Specifically, if we are trying to understand the reasons behind that.
Well, what is happening at the Belarus-Polish border is obviously much more than a simple European migrant crisis. Europe, of course, has been facing migrant crisis for many, many years. Although the migrant numbers have come down quite significantly than the peak of 2015, when you had more than 1 million migrants coming every year. Now the numbers are very, very small. But politically, the issue is very much alive, very sensitive. And this is affecting almost every country in Europe. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the European barometer surveys conducted by the European Commission for the last many years, migration has been one of the major concerns of the European citizens for many, many years. But here, the migrant crisis is actually mixed up with regional geopolitics. Now, since the Ukrainian crisis of 2014, there are tensions between Russia and EU. Earlier they used to have a strategic partnership. Mm-hmm. Now they may not be enemy of each other, but obviously they are not partners of each other.
Okay.
And Russia is one of the closest allies of Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus. And Western press has basically labeled him as the last dictator within Europe. He has been in power since 1994. Now relations between Europe and Belarus has been tense, particularly since a presidential election last year. There was large protests, and there was also massive crackdown. Mm-hmm. So as a result, and the EU has not really recognized those elections, and there has also been sanctions against many entities in Belarus. So the now EU is basically, and many leaders within EU, they are accusing that President Lukashenko is kind of orchestrating this kind of crisis to put pressure on Europe. As you mentioned, there are allegations that Belarus is kind of inviting, luring migrants to other parts.
Indeed, there are allegations and counter-allegations on both sides.
And facilitating kind of illegal migration to Europe, particularly to the border with Poland and also Latvia and Lithuania. So as a result, obviously tensions have gone up. Of course, the numbers, if you look at, are not really that great. Of course, Europe, the numbers have been coming and the migrants have been coming from different areas from Europe. But here, as I said, the problem is because of, the geopolitics, which has really mixed up.
Okay.
And now there is another angle to this. Because Polish government is really very hawkish on this now. And they are saying that through this, there's a large design, there's a hybrid kind of war Belarus is, pushing against the European Union, because Poland for the last many years has also been facing certain problems with the European Union, and internally we'll come back to these issues.
Okay, definitely. We'll come back to that part specifically, what's happening at Belarus and Polish border. But let's also try to understand the issue of migration. And I'd like to bring in Mr. Singh here. Mr. Singh, there have been several events in the recent past where migrants have, tried to gain access to, various countries, and that has also led to a bit of a crisis between more than two nations as well. The same thing which is getting repeated in, on the Belarus-Polish border. What I'm trying to understand here, and the question which I have to you is, why does it happen? In terms of, if we have to understand the broader concept of migration, obviously there are various reasons from one migration to other. But in a broader sense, if we have to understand the process of migration and the way, then it creates a crisis later on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me just, you've correctly raised the question correctly. Migration is a much larger issue. And we must look at the larger issue before we focus on Belarus or any one point. You said, what is the process of migration? Migration is the same as globalization. Migration means the mobility and movement of people, which is happening there all the time, all over the world. There's nothing new in it. It's been there for centuries and it will continue for a long time also. In Europe, the place that you're talking about, you see migration happening basically from Africa and the Gulf. Now, why is it that today it is Belarus, before this it was Italy, before this it was France? Now, you have a desire of a large number of people in Africa and in the Gulf who want to move towards Europe. Now, this is something which has to be seen in the larger context of the business environment in these countries. Obviously, the economies in Africa and the economies in the Gulf are not doing as well as the economies in Europe. So people feel that there is a place for them to go where they can secure a better future for themselves and for their families in the future. Now, this is something which raises the question of an equitable distribution of wealth. It raises the question of economics. And as Professor Sachdev has correctly pointed out, it raises the question of politics. It's a geopolitical issue. So a geopolitical issue mixed with an economic issue results in the kind of crisis that you're having at the moment in Belarus. But that Belarus crisis is only a small representation of actually the desire of a large number of people from Africa who have been moving since the 1960s onwards to Europe. It's almost 250,000 or 500,000 every year. Now, Professor Sachdev is correct, it is reduced. It is dramatically reduced in the last few years. But I would say that reduction is more as a due of COVID than it is of other desire of people to move to Europe as they did.
Because restrictions were already in place for more than a year and a half in those nations.
Yes, absolutely. And COVID is something which is not going away. And you have a sort of like a third phase happening in Europe at the moment, and people are getting more and more scared, but they get over that fear and yet migrate because they feel that they can get some kind of a job or they can get a better future in Europe. And you find this happening in many parts of the world. You find it happening in India itself. Forget about other places, but it happens even in India, where a large number of people try to come into India as illegal migrants or legal migrants or whatever.
And then internal migration also happens, Mr. Singh, from one particular state to another, which we've seen in India on a seasonal basis. That happens in other nations as well.
It happens all over the world, and it happens in India also. Yes, you're absolutely right. There is internal migration and there is also external migration. External migration, we have, India has something like about 30 million people overseas. Internal migration, we have at least about 10 to 15 million of those that go economically from one state to the other and try to get jobs. And you saw that during COVID, it became a major crisis.
Okay. Now, going back to what's happening at the Belarus-Polish border there, between Belarus and European Union. Professor Sachdeva, there's the European Union countries are raising a lot of questions, and pointing fingers towards Belarus, indirectly towards Russia as well, as to what is happening there vis-a-vis the migrant crisis. But if you have to understand, the rules and regulations which are there in place, there is a common asylum system as far as EU is concerned, and interestingly, not all the European Union countries have been on the same page vis-a-vis the asylum seekers and the migrant issue.
Well, I think for the last many years, as Dr. Didar Singh has mentioned, migration, of course, is a reality, and people are moving towards Europe. And if you look at demography in Europe, Europe would need people from outside, and people have been going there, and that will continue to be the situation. But the only problem is Europe wants to be kind of selective in this. There is appetite to have high-skilled labor because this is what they want, but at the same time, high-skilled labor is very mobile. They don't stick to one place. They move from one place to another place. They started with all the blue card and other schemes, which has not been very, very successful. Now here, what is really happening is, one is, as I mentioned, there is a domestic political issue in almost every country in Europe, and particularly in Poland and other countries. And in the last few years, we have also seen that the common kind of system which they try to build within Europe, this has created a lot of tensions within Europe, within the European institutions, and the whole Dublin kind of system, which they try to, in which basically allow people to come into Europe, and then you kind of distribute, in other different countries. Now that hasn't really worked, and particularly now what is happening, we are looking at the Central and Eastern Europe, and these were the countries which were really, really very much against of any kind of migration in the 2015, 16, 17 itself. Although the numbers, of course, those who are going to Europe, they are not going to stay in Poland or in Latvia or Lithuania. They would obviously move into Western Europe. But even last time also we saw the crises were created in Hungary. Of course, people were not staying in Hungary. They were planning to go to Austria or Germany and Sweden and other places. Now, they have not been able to really resolve this issue. And as a result of this, now this has become a big rhetoric. And we have also seen that, there is a rise of right-wing political parties all across Europe. And all these political parties are raising, illegal migrants. This has also been linked with now security issues. Okay. Because in the last few years, Europe has also seen many terrorist incidents happening.
Indeed.
So kind of people are worried that those who are coming, because, many people in the last few years, they have come from, of course, they are economic migrants, but people have also come from those hotspots where the internal destabilization is happening. You also be coming from Syria or from Iraq or from Afghanistan. And they happen to be of a different religion, which perhaps are creating another kind of, the problem, because multiculturalism within Europe has not been successful. Okay. So all kind of fears have been raised. Although demographically, the kind of situation what you have in Europe, they would need people from outside to work. But at the same time, they want to really control this. And it's not very easy to control. No, here, this is a very, very different situation altogether, what is happening at these borders now. Okay. Because here, yes, the migration problem is there. At the same time, now you're also raising fears about Russia and also what is happening at between Belarus and Europe. So it means if you look at all the statements coming from the Polish government, what they're saying is that this is actually not a migrant crisis. This is a political crisis created for a special purpose by Belarus with the kind of support from Russia. Of course, Belarus is saying that,
Indeed, that's a statement which is coming from the Polish Prime Minister, Professor Sachdeva, and he's also said that this crisis is far from over.
This crisis is far from over. And, for them, as I was saying, this also suits actually Polish government at the moment, because there is a certain opposition within Poland of the ruling government. So there have been a large number of demonstrations that have been going on. And for the last 2-3 years, there's also been a lot of tensions between Poland and the European Union member states and the European Union institutions. Okay. So they were under attack for the last few years. And now this particular crisis, what has happened is the government is trying to consolidate their political position within their own countries. At the same time, they're also raising this issue at the European level, within the European institutions. And we have also seen that all the European leaders and the European institutions, they have really rallied behind Poland, which wasn't really happening. So it means, different kind of politics, different kind of geopolitics is happening here.
Indeed. Both domestic and international factors are at play there. And you're right in pointing out all of them. That brings me to Mr. Singh. Mr. Singh, very complex situation. You explained the entire process of migration in very simple words to us, wherein it's an economic plus geopolitical issue as well. But once migrants starts pouring in, all landing at the borders, then it starts becoming a complex situation, as it is happening now, as it has happened earlier as well. Then there are security reasons as well. There are some nations, as Professor Sachdeva is pointing out, from European Union, who do need migrants, but they also want to control it. Looks like there is no, homogeneous process to deal with this issue.
You're absolutely right. I mean, in fact, what Professor Sachdeva has correctly pointed out, this is a real contradiction in terms, and we're seeing this contradiction actually in Europe. On the one hand, they desperately need more labor. Of course, they're trying to get more high-skilled labor, but they need all kinds of labor. And on the other hand, security and politics have become a very important part of their day-to-day life. So it's a contradiction in terms. On the one hand, you want, on the other hand, you don't. So this has become a political issue and has entered their elections, where you begin to find that a large number of rightist governments are now coming up all over Europe. However, before this, let me point out a few things about Europe which is important to understand and know.
Okay.
The first thing is that there is no common policy of migration in Europe. Please understand that. There is no common policy, even though it is one Europe, but 27 states control migration separately. Germany, we know in the last few years, allowed a large number of migrants to come in, and successfully so. I think it was a brilliant policy, because ultimately it will help them in managing their manufacturing base, which is beginning to dwindle, and they need new labor and they need new people. And France is now beginning to follow the same, and Italy is also following the same.
Okay.
In fact, you notice all over Europe, you have these large number of so-called schemes by which every 2-3 years they announce an amnesty and bring all the illegal migrants into legal migrants. That's how Indians have ended up today controlling the dairy farming in Italy. It's a very interesting phenomena. But on the Belarus crisis, which Professor Gulshan Sachdev has correctly pointed out, there the crisis is much more than just migration. It's a geopolitical issue.
Okay.
It's a geopolitical issue. And if you look at the map, it becomes very, very clear. Because Belarus is just on the edge of Europe. And it's supported, as Professor Gulshan has correctly pointed out, it's supported by Russia. It's an ally of Russia.
Okay.
So this map, as you see, provides Belarus as a point from where entry into Europe is possible. And where does this entry come from? It begins from Ankara. It begins from Istanbul. It begins from Turkey, actually. And how does it get to Turkey? Flights go from Turkey to Belarus, but to Turkey you can actually walk in. So a large number of migrants from Africa and the Gulf walk towards, or they move physically using the local connectivity to get it somehow into Turkey. And from Turkey they take a flight into Belarus and hope to enter Europe from up there. Now this is something which the Poles are beginning to oppose tremendously, but also using it as a way of drawing everybody together and make Poland the important part of Europe which needs to be supported by everyone else.
Okay.
So there's a lot of geopolitics happening. There's a lot of internal issues which are political in nature vis-a-vis Russia, which are coming to the fore. But coming back to the migration part,
what's the solution there, Dr. Singh? What kind of solution can we look at?
There is no solution. There is no solution. Europe is an aging society, and Europe needs more people. And ultimately, the more people are going to come to Europe. Well, we offered a solution from India. We said make labor partnerships with the countries of Europe, so that we can actually send you labor from India on a part-time basis. We offered this to many countries in Europe. Some accepted it. Denmark accepted it. France accepted it. But soon the whole of Europe has to accept this. And India could be one source from where you can actually have migrants that go into Europe, spend a few years, contribute to their manufacturing, and then return back home, like they do in the Gulf at the moment. But that's a longer solution, and we don't know whether it will happen. But on the migration front at a global level, let us understand that this is something which is there to stay. It is a permanent feature of globalization, where mobility is something that the business needs very badly, because business can't perform, especially after COVID-19, when there is a real crisis globally. You need to perform and do even better.
Indeed.
To perform and do better, you need more migrants. You need more better labor. You need high-skilled labor and you need low-skilled labor. It's a combination of both. So that's what provides the contradiction and the demand which is being created in Europe, whether from Belarus or from anywhere else.
Okay. Professor Sachdeva, your views there on the solution part, as Dr. Singh is pointing out, if you look at the larger problem or larger issue of migration, obviously there can't be one fixed solution for it. But when we are looking at European Union, do you agree that, these nations, these countries who are the center of attraction for migrants will have to evolve perhaps a much more robust common policy there? And in the long run, the agreement which Dr. Singh was referring to, which India had offered to some of these nations?
Well, I think this is what they have been trying for many, many years, to come to a common understanding. They thought actually they had some kind of common understanding earlier. But what in the last few years we have seen that those policies, when you actually start implementing, there was a lot of resentment from, particularly from Central Eastern Europe and from some other countries within Western Europe as well. So that particular solution or institutional mechanism has not been really working in Europe, and it has become much more serious political problem.
Okay.
And another reason is that if you want a European solution, it means you have to give the competencies as far as the migration is concerned to the European Union institutions, which none of the member states is willing to do that. So what you have is you can coordinate some of your policies together. But at the same time, the competencies as far as the migration is concerned still are with the member states. So people, they do not really apply for asylum or for migration to the EU. They apply to a particular member states. And member states, of course, they have the right to deny or accept any kind of applications. But of course, there are certain broader rules that what kind of treatment to asylum seekers and, all other kind of humanitarian issues. Up to that point, yes. And what they're trying to do is, they know that this is a problem which they are going to face in the long run. They are already facing it because of their own demography. Though in two ways, I think they're trying to resolve it. Okay. One is slowly they're trying to find some common kind of policy mechanism within EU, which is not easy, but they'll continue to do that. At the same time, technological advancement of all these countries, because ultimately all these European economies are, of course, they're large manufacturing, but at the same time, largely basically service economy. Okay. So how through technologies to artificial intelligence and everything else, you may need perhaps less people in the long run to do all those activities. At the same time, you very, very selectively import people or allow people to come, particularly in the high technology areas. And then you also work with third countries. This is what they have been working with Turkey. This is also they have been working with so many other countries in Africa and other places. And they have also, like even with India, they have also have some kind of the program now where they want basically to have facilitate some kind of illegal migration, which exactly is required in Europe. At the same time, other kind of unauthorized, movement which is taking place. Okay. You try to resolve those issues in those countries themselves. So so this is kind of try to work in two ways. But there are no easy things because ultimately. But more than that, I know one is of course economic issue, that how do you really resolve those issues through technology and those agreements with other countries and within member state themselves. And the secondly, people when they come, whether they are high technology, low technology, or other things, if I mean, there was less of a problem when this was happening from Central and Eastern Europe.
Indeed.
When these countries became member of the European Union, many people from Poland and other countries, Romania, they went into Western Europe.
Okay.
Because they were basically Christians, they were white, so it was relatively easy for them to kind of assimilate. But when people come from other countries, and particularly when the people are coming from Middle East and from Africa, so there are other large issues now.
Domestic issues as well.
Particularly, how this has become the much larger, and then of course the related to security issue.
Indeed.
The whole securitization and politicization of this migration issue, that has become much more difficult, because you can have certain technical solutions to your economic issues, but you can't really have a technical solution to your political issues. And here what is happening with the Belarus is regional geopolitics, your tension with Russia, because what is happening at the Belarus today is simple small migrant crisis, but at the same time there is also military buildup by Russia at the Ukrainian border.
Indeed.
So all kind of pressures are being built by Russia and along with Belarus to have, because they were not talking to Belarus, but now Chancellor Merkel has talked to, I mean, they have already,
Indeed, there is a lot of dialogue process which is going on there as well. Thank you so much, Professor Sachdeva, as well as Dr. Didar Singh, for sharing your views and inputs. As our experts were pointing out, clearly there are a lot of factors at play when we are looking at just the Belarus-Polish border migrant crisis. But overall, migration is the result of, economic issues as well as geopolitics. This time around, looks like there are other domestic and international factors as well which are at play. A complex issue, undoubtedly, but then the countries involved, that is, those nations which attract these migrants, will have to find long-term solutions, as our experts were also pointing out. We'll come back again tomorrow with a different topic. Till then, keep watching Sansad Television. Thank you.